Simon, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Evan.
Simon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
Yeah, no problem. I work for the Association of Independent Schools, AISWA. We are supporting our member schools in the implementation of their curriculum. That's what my role is, helping schools understand what their mandates are and supporting them in the way that they want to implement the curriculum. But as an organisation more broadly, we are strong advocates, obviously, for the independent sector. And we support schools in WA across a whole range of matters that are important in ensuring that they are effectively running their schools.
Sounds like you have a lot on your plate.
Yeah, I mean it's really rewarding work. We've got a really innovative and creative system, so it's fantastic to kind of see what all the schools are doing and how they're contributing to the learning of their students.
Fantastic. Simon, I want to turn the clock back. Now it's the end of 2022. A new company comes out and they kind of usher in the era of AI. What are your first impressions?
Well, the first impressions were I remember back to the end of 2022, before ChatGPT was released to the public, and OpenAI had released an image generation tool, which was DALL-E. And I remember running a professional learning for teachers on AI in education back then, and just highlighting how this amazing technology came out. And when I'm talking to teachers about this evolution of the technology, I often go back to what I was showing on that day, and some of the images that I was showing that they can go ahead and create are ludicrously funny now because of the poor quality that it was at the time. So when you compare it to now, you just think, "Oh my gosh, that technology was so poor," but in reality, it was only a few years ago. And you can now see how the technology has got so much better so quickly. But the key thing at the time, which was really mind blowing, was that it was able to create these images that you requested. But it was difficult for people to understand that these were not images that were already existing on the internet and we were just searching for them like you would in a typical Google image search. It was actually creating these images based on this kind of technology that we really hadn't had introduced to us. So we've seen so much evolve over that short period of time, and we're starting to become kind of desensitized almost with how good it is now. I mean, we look at these kind of the abilities which technology has now to generate podcasts, for example, and whilst it's almost magic, people's initial reaction now is, "Oh, I wish the accent wasn't American," or whatever. And we just kind of gloss over how cool the actual technology is. So we're really coming to grips and becoming used to what exactly we have access to, which is pretty cool now.
It's amazing. It is amazing. But a lot of us are seeing that as a disruption in our day-to-day life and in the way of how we used to do things.
Yeah, I
Is
mean
that
that's particularly evident in the teaching practice for sure.
is that a disruption or is it an opportunity?
Well, I think we have to see it as both. A disruption doesn't mean that it's necessarily not an opportunity. Um, Education has traditionally carried out the same practices over time. We've seen the implementation of new technologies in education for sure, and that has been to great benefit. But often what happens is we take those key affordances of new technology, which reiterate what's traditionally been done in education. So, in a way, we've somehow had a bit of a resistance to real wholesale change. We can kind of see very similar practices happening now in classes, which has consistently happened over quite a long period of time. So, in that sense, technology has enhanced the classroom to a degree, but it certainly does provide a disruptive opportunity now where, because we have unprecedented access to information, and then we can ask the technology to actually do stuff with that information, which is that point of difference between, for example, the internet browser or the calculator.
Mm,
Because we have that action involved in the information that we can access through AI, it really does present an opportunity for real change. It presents an opportunity for us to reevaluate what are the most important things to be learning in education. How can we reprioritize what's already deemed to be critically important? What things fall off the cart? So there's an opportunity in that sense, but then there's also that operational stuff. How can we enhance the practices in schools, be it the administrative sides of education or in the school, or be it in the actual teaching and learning? You know, there's some really cool things happening at the moment with how we can access different data points and find out information really quickly, which we just couldn't do before. So, really utilizing that data collection and analysis, which is the real bread and butter of AI, in a way that can help us do things that we just weren't able to do before. So, in that sense, it provides both an opportunity and a disruption.
I agree. Change always will come with the opportunities, and some of us will be advantages, some of us will see it as as a disadvantage. But in schools, what are the biggest issues that you see now, and how they navigating this?
Yeah, it's interesting, and they've certainly evolved, and I think they will continue to evolve as we get a grips over the real widespread disruption that it's causing. You know, it really does hit every facet of education. So, one of the key primary things that we were concerned about, or that schools were facing, was whether or not we can accurately understand or accurately judge where a student is at in terms of their knowledge, skills, and understanding, based on, for example, take home tasks. Are students just using this technology as a way to solve questions or solve tasks that bypass that cognitive process? And then what they demonstrate to us is not actually an accurate reflection on what they can know and do. So that was that kind of primary challenge. And it goes a little bit beyond just students cheating. That's kind of not the primary concern here. You know, what schools and teachers are really concerned about is how can we help students? So how can we understand where a student's at, what things engage them, what things challenge them, what things are the most effective practices to help them learn, where are they at individually, and then how can we create an educational experience that best supports them. And unless we have a really good understanding of where students are at, it's essentially impossible to go about planning and implementing an effective learning experience for those students. So it's not necessarily about cheating, it's about understanding where students are at. And we need to have authentic assessments and authentic data which do reflect where students are at. So that was one of the primary challenges. We then kind of started to get an understanding of the sort of threat that this might be posing on privacy. So we're concerned about data, how students are using, how teachers are using, and schools are using this technology in a way that is maintaining data sovereignty. We're not exposing students to any uncertain risks. And the other thing, as I touched on before, with relation to that teaching and learning, is that cognitive bypass. So, what happens if students are using this technology and become over reliant on it?
Mm,
Then they're kind of put under a threat where what is deemed to be important to learn and the processes of learning, which is, I think, critically important. You know, how do we actually learn? How do we become good learners, regardless of the content that's placed in front of us? If students aren't able to develop those skills because they're offloading those tasks to technology, then it presents a little bit of a risk for them. So, how do we communicate that? How do we talk about the ethical side of things? Um, One of the key challenges now, which we're starting to understand, and this is coming more and more to the fore as teachers are being exposed and encouraged to use this technology, particularly in light of the concerns around teacher workload. which is the deprofessionalisation of educators. So, how
Mm.
do we ensure that teachers are able to use this technology to enhance their practice whilst not risking the level of input that they have? We know that education is a really personal experience, and it does depend on effective implementation of pedagogy and, really importantly, the development of strong relationships with our students. So, there becomes a point where we really need to establish a strong culture of teachers and educators at all levels being strongly involved in the way that education is being conducted. And we're posed with a bit of a risk when AI comes into the equation and has the potential to make decisions for educators. Of course, educators want to be the ones who are making those key decisions, and they're expert at doing that. We just need to ensure that, given the time that they are afforded and the range of different tasks that are in front of them, that they do have those opportunities to be the ones who make those key decisions as opposed to offloading it to AI.
A couple of points there. You mentioned the cognitive ability of the students and the teacher's ability to bring in the personalized experience for the students and use the correct pedagogy. And AI seems to be one of those big disruptors at the moment. Do
Yeah,
you feel that
absolutely.
we're handing over our critical thinking to AI? Is this something that you're seeing, or
Well, it's a real challenge because it's almost human nature to find that path of least resistance, to find that way to implement, or to come to a solution with the fewest barriers that we can. And often for students, that means using AI, using technology. But of course, that comes with a risk. As Dylan Williams says, it's kind of like taking a robot to the gym, where you're getting it to do all of the exercises and you get no gains out of it. So, in terms of critical thinking, I personally think that the introduction of AI might be the catalyst to prioritize that much more highly than what it has been in the past. But AI isn't the thing that has brought in the need for critical thinking. We've seen this post truth era, the whole fake news movement come in with, we see politics and media and businesses all becoming so intertwined and having such critical influences on each other that it's an absolute necessity for people to have critical thinking. And social media has played a real contribution to that conundrum too. So, if we are handing over our thought processes to technology, or we are handing over tasks and then just accepting what is presented back to us as what we want to use, that poses a significant risk. So I think that should be a real priority moving forward in what we teach students at school, that ability to critically think.
so do you think AI will simply make our current system more efficient? We
Well,
hold to our critical thinking, or could it push us more into a more transformative change in education?
well, that's the question, isn't it? Is this going to lead to an optimization of the current system, or is it going to lead to transformation? So, optimization would see the current processes just carried out more effectively or more efficiently, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We can't disregard that. But I do think that there is a real need for change. In Australia, over the last 20 years, we've seen growing concerns, right across a series of different data sets internationally and nationally, around the performance of students in our education system. So that's in terms of our educational attainment levels as well as our levels of equity. So they're the two key drivers of our education system: is excellence and equity. And over the last 20 years, we've seen this constant drive to reform education to enhance both of those areas, get our students to be achieving at higher levels and close that equity gap. So there's been a pretty frank admission that we have real gains which are necessary in education. We really need to improve and we really want to improve. So, if we go down the path of merely optimizing what we are currently doing, we are only reiterating what has happened. And I don't see how that can move the trajectory towards stagnation or decline in performance and growing inequity. So I feel like there's a real need, and I hope that this technology provides enough of a disruption which shifts us into this space of transformation. But I don't want to I don't want to say that using technology merely for enhancement is no good. I do think there is great value to optimize teacher workflows because we know the current stresses that they're under.
Yeah.
So there's real value in focusing on both, but we do need to shift to from an optimization to a transformation, or at the very least have both of those ways of thinking in mind.
So if AI can perform many tasks that previously relied on human knowledge, experience, and everyone else's done would have done in the past, what skills become more important for students now to develop? Because we had the past, that's us, the previous generation. New generation comes in, they have these new tools. What human skills do they really need to take forward in using AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. We already touched on critical thinking. Critical thinking is going to be more and more important. We've seen, as I said, the post-truth and the fake news movements come out, and there's been no better time to have to be more informed about what we think and be able to have those skills to critically scrutinize information that is being given to us. Anyone could put any information out there on the internet. As soon as things start to get followings, we see the algorithm kick in and we get presented with more and more information which really aligns to whatever it is that we've been thinking or exploring. So the technology out there does do and is effective at presenting us information which will help control essentially or sway us towards a particular point of view. So critical thinking is going to be one of those key things. I think we've also got a real focus on learning because we see incredible access to information now. We need to develop people who are effective learners. In the past, we've relied on it's encyclopedias and the internet,
Oh
and
yeah.
we've really had to go out there and find that information, which has become easier and easier over time. But now we have access to information, and whether it's peer-reviewed academic information, conspiracy sort of stuff, or just social commentary, this access to information gets us in a position where we are going to need to be able to utilize that information after we've verified it. So, how are we helping students become good learners? What skills do they need? So this is where we start to think about metacognition. How are we developing students in that space? How are we developing them in their ways to use this information creatively? So bringing interdisciplinary knowledge in and then being able to create new solutions to problems, as well as being effective in communication and interpersonal skills. We know that this technology is going to be able to, we're going to be able to use it to offload a lot of cognitive tasks. So where does that human connection stay? And how do we develop skills in people to be resilient? And of course, we've got something which is a massive concern at the moment, which is the mental health space. With this technology being something which is much more used and something that is taking over so many facets of our life. We've seen examples across Australia where students are utilising this technology and people more broadly, to vent and almost like they're using it as a form of therapy. And that poses real concerns. So how do we start to consider the well-being and health of our society and educating people about that? They're those key things that we're going to have to shift towards in education. And the trick is that all this has to come on top of that really key knowledge and skills that we already develop in schools. So the task's only going to become more and more complex for teachers who seem to be getting all of these new issues put on their plates, and they're having to deal with those.
They are very extremely important capabilities for the students to start building on for the future. And you touched on it, and you said, well, we're already doing stuff. Now we have to start doing more on top of it. Why do they often struggle to gain this priority in school, right? So we already have the past, the things that we need to do. Now we have this new technology that comes on top of it. We're struggling in schools to get the priority and get the traction that we need.
Yeah, we are. Education has been a field that has slowly, or change is very slow. We've seen, we see the same practices happening that have happened over the last kind of 150 years in classrooms, and there's a real need for change. I'll give you an example. In the curriculum in schools from pre-primary to up to year 10 is has been constructed and is viewed as a three-dimensional cube. We've got the learning areas on one side. So we see those individual learning areas. If you're in a high school, you might teach one or two of those learning areas. And in a primary school, you're often teaching most of them, if not all. But then in another dimension, you've also got what we call the general capabilities. So these are the kind of those things that I've been alluding to about what might be becoming more important in this technological field. And the reason why they're on a different dimension is because those general capabilities cut across all of those learning areas. So if you're a teacher of science, for example, it is your responsibility to teach all of those general capabilities. And they're those general skills that don't just sit within one discipline. So one of those general capabilities is digital literacy, or what was previously known as the ICT capability. And this is essentially how we use computers and digital devices. So this has been implemented from the for quite some time, and it's been something that we don't assess. It's been something that is almost viewed as an extra task, as you've alluded to, one of those new things. When technologies come along, we've seen that we need to develop these skills and literacies around the use of technology so people can use it effectively and, importantly, stay safe when they're using it. So because this isn't something that is assessed, it isn't something that's mandated to be reported on, it kind of gets left to the fore. Of course, there's many things that do contribute to this situation, one of which is that we have such a tightly packed curriculum, and teachers just don't have the time to be doing all of this stuff. So some things fall off to the side. Some things just don't get that priority. But one of the big contributors to this is how we view what is deemed to be successful in education, which is mainly dominated by what we assess. And what we assess is typically what is most easy to assess. So another one of those general capabilities is critical and creative thinking. How do you judge how creative a student is, or how do you assess their level of critical thinking? It's very, very difficult to do that. So what we see is the priorities on the things that are most easily assessed. And that has traditionally been how much on a particular topic a student can remember. And then they can demonstrate that memory of that topic in a traditional assessment. So most of education is geared towards that. We've seen the introduction of national assessments, which is that, and that has become the priority of schools because that's how they become judged. So not the fault of schools, it's just the way that the system has shaped these national priorities. And we've seen concepts like performativity come out, where schools are prioritizing particular subject or learning areas because that's what's tested and that's how they get judged. And then as a result of that prioritization, we see other areas become deprioritized, and then they're marginalized. And that has significant consequences on, students who are potentially more interested or more developed or have a higher levels of readiness in certain learning areas. It kind of puts those students to the side. It marginalizes them somewhat. So I'm not trying to suggest that the way that we prioritize these things is to put them into a space where we are testing students on it. We shouldn't be justifying the importance of something based on whether we test them on it. However, maybe some sort of reprioritization through how we judge the quality of skills could be a really strong movement in that space. And through that, we might see a a prioritization at the classroom level, at the school level, and at the system level in these skills that become arguably more important than ever, and potentially even more important than some of the stuff that's been traditionally taught in schools. That's the challenge that we face because the system is so self preserving, and there are particular strategies that are in place to ensure that what we're doing is of high quality, but we need to consider as well what we're not doing, and then how the best way to get those into the classroom, and having our students develop in those spaces too.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to learn how to use the tools. Everyone needs to learn how to become more efficient. But what does it actually mean for students and teachers to be AI literal?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a little bit of that already. Part of it is that critical thinking. So, how is it that when I'm provided with information, how is it that we are able to verify whether that information is true or whether it's opinion based? What biases are in there? Being being aware of the way that artificial intelligence works. So fundamentally, whilst it's evolved over time, at the core of these text generation AIs is essentially a form of prediction. So they're developing a large language model based on accessible content. So that's our model when we go out and we retrieve all of this information that we have access to, and then we train that model. And that model, through that training, is able to identify relationships and patterns in language. And by analyzing or establishing those patterns and those relationships, it's then able to start to generate content based on what information it's been provided with. Now, if we're AI literate, we're able to look at what that data set contains and start to think about what sort of uh, bias is evident within that data set. So, where does that information come from? We know that the vast majority of the internet has been developed by white American males between the ages of 18 to 35 years old. And therefore, we have a particular frame of mind or a particular perspective which is naturally being reproduced through AI. And then the consequence of that is that we get more of the content that produces those kinds of perspectives, or coming from that sort of perspective, which is then used to train the next models of AI. So we kind of get this constant snowballing of particular perspectives, and certain perspectives are marginalized and oppressed. So being aware of how this technology works gives us a little bit of an ability to critically understand and critique what is presented to us. And part of that is then choosing what sort of tools are best to use, which AI tools provide us with links which can guide us to where that information came from, or which tools give us the ability to construct our own data sets, which we have critically analyzed ourselves, and then we're using that technology based on that data set. So then, of course, we've got the whole ethics. So this isn't just about the sustainability, whilst that's an incredible concern, and being aware of that certainly helps us be more AI literate. We need to be aware of what risks are posed with using this technology, be that in the in the advancement of particular ideologies or perspectives, and also the sort of risk that that's having on me mentally. Does it mean that I become reliant, or does it mean that I'm not exercising my own cognitive skills? So there's lots to it, and I think what we need to understand is that they do fall under that category of general capabilities, which sit across subject disciplines. So it's important that we start to prioritize those things in education, because then our students can use the technology to affect, and we're getting that benefit of the technology whilst also maintaining their safety. One key thing which I think is worth mentioning is, with relation to that digital literacy, we do a sample assessment across Australia. So the people who run NAPLAN, the National Assessment Program, they do an assessment every 3 years on the digital literacy of Australian students. They don't like NAPLAN does assess every single student in particular years. They do a demographic sample of Australian students in years 6 and 10, and the longitudinal results of that assessment are quite astonishing. We've actually seen the digital literacy of students decline over the last
Really?
20 odd years. So since I think in 2008, since 2008, we've seen a decline in digital literacy. So this is that generation that we classify as digitally literate, or those digital generations. They're the students who can pick up technology and use it to effect with very little help, that they're just born
Mhm.
into those digital natives. But when we actually get the data on how digitally literate they are, we actually see around about 50% of year 6 students, 50% of year 10 students not meeting that level of what we would classify as proficient. So we see half of
Hold
our
on.
year 6 and year
Say that
10.
again, because to me, to my understanding, and to everyone around us, the Gen Z generation are the more, highly advanced, digital savvy generation ever. And you're telling me that they're not? 50% of them, they're not?
As per this assessment, so
Wow.
we have to consider what we actually see to be classified as digitally literate. But the data suggests, as per our national assessment program, which is based on our general capability ICT, which is how well students can use the technology for purposes of communication of ideas, for purposes of finding information, as well as safety online. So that's that data security, privacy, digital footprint sort of thing. So all of those things factor into what we would classify as digitally literate in terms of this national assessment program. And we've got about 50% of our students not meeting that pass mark for digital literacy, which is quite astounding. I think that the real key thing there, though, is that it's not just about how to consume technology, it's how to be creative with technology. How can we pick up a phone or pick up a device and help create solutions to problems? How can we safely use that technology? And that's where we're falling behind. And that is as a result of that non prioritization in that. And the way that I see it is that this is mostly about safety of students. It's about getting them prepared with the skills that gives them agency within society, because without those skills they are either unsafe, or they will find it very difficult to be productive in society. So how do we shift from being consumers of technology to creative users of technology?
Amazing. I didn't know that. I thought that the generation that is coming, Gen Z, is the most literate, and they are going to teach us. And you touched on the very basic stuff, right? Privacy, cybersecurity, things that are in everyday life.
I'll
Looking
give you a
ahead,
couple of examples of what is
please.
deemed as proficient at those cutoffs of year 6 and year 10. Part of it is being able to change the font or the size of pictures inside a text file, for example, or in a presentation software. Part of it is being able to effectively search Google. Part of it is being able to store information accurately. So, one of the challenges that we face is that the technology that we use in education is all consumer based technology. So it's made to be able to be used by my 4-year-old child and my 94-year-old grandmother. We want everyone to be able to access this technology. Our organizations want them to be able to use that technology, these commercial organizations. So as a result, it's watered down for that user friendly element. And because that same technology is being used in education, students don't get to be able to, really dig into those core fundamentals of use of technology, like storing a file. It's really easy on your phone to open up the Photos app and access all of the photos that you've taken. But where are they stored? What's the file structure like? How can you find a particular file based on the date that it was taken inside those file structures? Because these are all the challenges that we face when we use a computer. Part of it is starting to getting them to use this technology in ways that will help them in those fundamental skills as well as being safe. So we're not setting the bar too high, and unfortunately we've got a really high percentage of students who aren't meeting that bar.
I see. So that is the blueprint for the future, isn't it?
Well, I think so. I think really grasping what are the most important things to do in education. We kind of have this saying, Maslow's before Bloom's. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs are those basic things that we need in life to survive. That's the shelter, the love, the food, then the water. Those simple things that we need to survive, and then we need to have those things ticked off before we can be inside as an effective learner in education. But in education, when we think about Bloom's taxonomy, that is essentially a pyramid of levels of knowledge. So at the base of the pyramid, you might just have basic knowledge. So you remember something, and then you can state that information when you need to recall that information. But as you kind of move up, the tasks or the level of or the depth of your knowledge gets more complex. So that's when you would see not only being able to know and understand something, but then you can analyze and you can be creative with that knowledge. So it's really important that we cover off that Maslow's stuff in terms of privacy and security before we start to think about how we could get these students to be really high depth of knowledge learners. So I think that AI literacy and that digital literacy more broadly is part of that. It's covering off how we keep our students safe and how do we ensure that their health and well-being is prioritized. And because of the level of technology in society now, it's a real concern about this data security and privacy. You've only got to look around. We've all been involved in some sort of data breach of some kind. It's quite incredible to see, in Australian society of the last few years, how many pieces of sensitive information have been compromised. And we're all affected by this. So prioritizing these sorts of things is going to be critical.
Absolutely right. In conclusion, what is the one thing that if a teacher or a student are listening to this podcast, what is the one thing that they can take away and that they can implement tomorrow to see them into the future, to build their skills into the future?
Well, it depends on what angle you're coming from. If it's for yourself, it's not being worried about change, but it's also being aware of the risks that you do put yourself under or that you subject yourselves to. Now, we're not talking, massive risks immediately on your health and safety, but we are concerned about, for example, our data online. So being aware of that whilst also not being too hesitant to use the technology. I think if it's about students, we really do need to think about how we can educate them around the use of this technology. So when it's appropriate and when it isn't, so then they can understand the risks that they subject themselves to. And that's not just about plagiarism, for example. It's about a student making an informed decision about, if I use this technology at this point in my learning, am I subjecting myself to the risk of not developing particular knowledge or skills that I will need in the future? Once they develop those understandings, at least they can make an informed decision around that. And the challenge really becomes for educators, how do we ensure that our students are most motivated and engaged in the learning process to go about carrying out authentically the sorts of learning that we're asking them to? I certainly think that strengthening digital literacy and AI literacy as part of that is going to be a real importance. But the challenge again for teachers is that we're being subjected to this new technology too. So we've got to develop our own digital literacy and our own AI literacy. We discussed before about the level of digital literacy of our students. It's crazy the amount of teachers who will say, in reference to students using the technology, oh, they know how to use it better than I do. A teacher of maths has never ever come up to me and said, oh, the students know how to do equations better than I do, so I just kind of let them lead that side of things. It's the responsibility of educators to be aware of what needs to happen in their schools, and it's a responsibility of the schools and the systems to ensure that these things are prioritized and that teachers are put in the best position in terms of their knowledge to be able to teach this sort of content, and given the support and the opportunity to be able to implement it in the classrooms, because teachers are absolutely under the pump when it comes to what they've got to do. There's so many issues and concerns that are at the forefront of their mind that often the content becomes a something that kind of sits secondary to student health and well-being, for example. So there's so many challenges that students and teachers face, but being brave, being aware is certainly a good step in the right direction.
Simon, thank you very much for this valuable conversation. Absolutely, our teachers need our support, and our students need more guidance into ushering them into this new AI era. Thank you very much.
No, I appreciate the time. My wife won't let me talk about it to her anymore, so I appreciate you listening to me.
Anytime, anytime, Simon. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.